There is a particular kind of silence that belongs to hospital rooms in the early morning. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest, but the silence of things being held very still, the way you hold a cracked thing before you decide whether to set it down gently or let it fall. I had been in that silence for 11 days. The room at Mercy General was on the fourth floor, east wing, overlooking a parking structure, and, if you pressed your cheek to the glass at a certain angle, a thin strip of sky, the color of old pewter. I know this because I spent a great deal of those 11 days looking at that strip of sky. When you are a woman who has managed a household, raised children, balanced accounts, and organized the lives of everyone around you for 43 years, and you're suddenly reduced to a bed with guardrails and a call button, you find that you have a great deal of time to look at things, to think, to understand, at last, the difference between what you have been told and what is actually true. My name is Vivian Cecile Okafor Brooks. I am 71 years old, and 11 days into my hospital stay, with a bruised rib, a repaired hairline fracture in my left hip, and a diagnosis of moderate pneumonia that had been quietly developing for 6 weeks before anyone noticed, my granddaughter Amara came to visit me on a Tuesday afternoon with a thermos of jollof rice she had made herself, and a look on her face that I recognized immediately. It was the look of a young person carrying something they do not know how to put down. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Amra is 23 years old. She is the daughter of my son Marcus's first marriage, from before Renee, and she has her mother's wide-set eyes and her grandfather's jawline, and, I have always believed, my particular gift for reading rooms without appearing to. She is one of those young people who seem to carry a kind of quiet radar, always aware of the temperature, always measuring the distance between what is being said and what is true. She set the thermos on the side table. She hugged me carefully around my shoulder, the side without the line. She sat down in the plastic chair beside my bed, and she looked at me with those eyes, and she said, "Grandma, how are you feeling?" Not "you look great, you look so much better." Not the performed cheerfulness that everyone else brought into the room like a shield against having to witness something real. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I said, "but clearer." She nodded. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not say anything for a moment. Outside, a cart went by in the hallway, wheels squeaking against linoleum, and then it was quiet again. "Something has happened," I said. It was not a question. Amara looked at the thermos. Then she looked at me. "Dad doesn't know I'm telling you." "Your father rarely knows the things that matter," I said, and I meant it kindly. Marcus is not a bad man. He's a man who has spent 36 years choosing comfort over clarity, which is a different thing entirely, but it has the same effect over time. "Grandma." She stopped. She started again. "Grandma, she's moved her mother in." The room was very quiet. "Into the house," I said. "Into your room." I held that for a moment. I looked at the strip of sky through the window. I breathed carefully, because breathing too deeply still pulled at the rib. "Tell me," I said. And she did. Before I tell you what Amara told me that Tuesday afternoon, before I tell you what I found when I finally came home, what I chose to do and what I chose not to do, what happened in the weeks that followed and what happened at the end, I need to tell you who I am. Not the version of me that my daughter-in-law Renee had constructed in her mind. Not the version of me that existed in the convenient story she told herself and her mother, and, eventually, my son. The real one. I was born in Lagos in 1953, the second of 5 children, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a woman who kept the family's finances in a leather ledger that she locked in a tin box under the marital bed. My mother, whose name was Adizi, but whom everyone called Mama C, believed with absolute conviction that a woman who did not understand money was a woman who would always be at the mercy of someone who did. She taught me to read a balance sheet before I could properly ride a bicycle. She taught me that the ledger was not merely a record of numbers, it was a record of power. Who had it? Who was spending it? Who was slowly, quietly draining it away? Numbers do not lie, she told me once, pressing the ledger flat with both palms. But the people holding the pen sometimes do. I came to England in 1979 on a scholarship to study accounting at the University of Birmingham. I was 26 years old. I had 40 pounds sterling, a second-hand coat that was 2 sizes too large, and the absolute certainty that I would not be returning home without having built something. I met Emmanuel Okafor at a church gathering in Handsworth in 1981. We married in 1983. We had Marcus in 1985. We moved to Leicester in 1989 when Emmanuel's engineering firm offered him a partnership, and we bought the house on Elmwood Drive in 1991 with a mortgage that we paid off together in 2004, 13 years ahead of schedule, because that was how Emmanuel and I did things. Carefully, deliberately, without announcing it to anyone. Emmanuel died of a stroke in 2015. He was 62 years old. He died on a Wednesday morning in October, very suddenly, in the kitchen, with his reading glasses on and a cup of tea going cold on the counter. I was at the office. I had retired from my position as a senior accounts manager at Hartwell and Associates 2 years earlier. But I consulted part-time because I have never been a woman who could sit quietly and watch the world manage itself. I got the call at 11:14 in the morning. What I want you to understand is this. Everything Emmanuel and I built, we built together, and everything we built together, we built carefully. The house, the savings, the pension, the investment portfolio that I had been quietly, consistently growing since 1997, saw when I began redirecting a percentage of my earnings into accounts that existed in my name alone. Not out of secrecy, not out of distrust, but out of the same lesson my mother had pressed into a leather ledger on a Tuesday evening in Lagos 40 years before. A woman who does not understand her own money is a woman who will always be asking permission to use it. By the time Emmanuel died, we had assets that would have surprised most people who knew us. By the time Renee moved her mother into my bedroom, those assets had grown considerably further. But I am getting ahead of myself. Marcus met Renee Adebayo in 2018 at a professional conference in Manchester. She was 41 at the time. His second wife, 11 years younger than Marcus, 14 years younger than me, when I married her father-in-law. She was a project manager at a logistics company, and she was, when I first met her, a woman of obvious capability. Organized, direct, efficient in the particular way of people who have always had to manage a great deal with limited resources and no patience for waste. I want to be honest with you about Renee, because these stories are easy to tell wrong. She was not a villain when I first knew her. She was a woman with ambitions she had never been able to fully name, married to a man who was comfortable in ways she was still learning to be, stepping into a family that had a history she had not been part of. She had a mother, a woman named Dolores Adebayo, aunt whom I met at the wedding, and several times afterward, who had spent the better part of 68 years performing the particular drama of a woman whom life had wronged and who expected the people around her to compensate her accordingly. Dolores was loud in the way of women who have learned that silence earns them nothing. She laughed too fully at things that were not quite funny. She occupied the center of any room she was in by force of pure will. She had opinions about everything: food, furniture, other people's children, the correct way to press a tablecloth, and she delivered those opinions with the confidence of someone who had never been contradicted in a way that stuck. She called me Vivian in a tone that made it sound like a polite version of something else. And I, for my part, was pleasant. I was warm, as I am always warm. I set good tables when they came to dinner. I cooked the things that Marcus had grown up loving, and I added things I thought Renee might appreciate, and I asked Dolores about her health and her garden and the grandchildren she had from Renee's siblings with genuine interest, because I am a woman who is genuinely interested in people, even the difficult ones, especially the difficult ones. I watched. I noted. I did not say everything I thought. This is a habit I have had my entire life, and it has served me better than speaking has. And the trouble began, as trouble in families often does, with something so small it seemed almost embarrassing to name. It was Christmas 2021. Marcus and Renee were hosting that year, which I was glad of. I had been feeling the house on Elmwood Drive as a weight in those months after Emmanuel. A beautiful weight. A weight I was glad to carry, but a weight nonetheless. And the prospect of a holiday where someone else managed the logistics felt like a gift. I arrived on Christmas Eve with 2 bottles of Bordeaux and a tin of shortbread, and Amara, who was spending the holiday between households. Dolores was already there. She had arrived the day before, ostensibly to help Renee prepare, and she was installed in the guest room with the confident settledness of a woman who had not checked whether she was wanted so much as decided that she was. The kitchen, when I arrived, was Renee's. That is the only way I know to say it. The kitchen that Renee rented from my son in a house that Marcus had bought with money that was, or in its origins, half mine. The kitchen was Renee's, and Dolores stood beside her daughter in it with the particular pleasure of a woman who has always wanted a grander stage than life has given her, and has finally, in this borrowed house, found a way to stand on one. "Vivienne," Dolores said, looking up from the pot she was stirring. "We weren't sure what time you'd be coming." I had called Marcus that morning and told him I would arrive at 6. "The traffic was kind," I said, and set the wine on the counter and kissed my son's cheek. It was not one thing. It was, as these things always are, the slow accumulation of small things. It was the seating arrangement at Christmas dinner, where the chair at the head of the table, Emmanuel's chair, the chair I had sat at since 2015 without discussion, because it was simply understood, was given to Dolores without comment, and I was placed to one side between Amara and one of Marcus's colleagues from the firm. It was the way Renee referred to the house as our home, in a sentence that included Dolores without a pause, as if the geography of family were something that arranged itself naturally around whoever was standing in the kitchen. It was Marcus who noticed nothing. Marcus is, and I say this with the specific honesty that only a mother can access, a man who was raised to be kind and educated to be capable, and who has spent the majority of his adult life choosing the path of least friction. He loves me genuinely. He loves Renee genuinely. He operates in the space between those two facts by simply not looking too closely at either of them. "Mom, you look fantastic," he said that evening, and refilled my glass and squeezed my shoulder as he passed. And that was, for Marcus, a complete accounting of the situation. I smiled. I ate my Christmas dinner. I watched Dolores at the head of the table, and I thought about my mother's leather ledger, and I thought about the house on Elmwood Drive, and I thought about the accounts in my name, and I thought, this is information, I am simply collecting it. I fell in January of 2023. It sounds simple when I say it that way. I fell. But the truth is more layered and more lonely than that word suggests. I had been unwell for several weeks, a cough that I attributed to the winter damp, a shortness of breath I attributed to being 70 and not as young as I felt inside, a fatigue I attributed to the anniversary of Emmanuel's death and the particular heaviness that follows you through the month of October like a shadow you can't outrun. I am a woman who has spent her entire life attributing things to other things. It is a form of management. It is also, occasionally, a form of delay. The cough had deepened into something that sat in my chest and would not move. On the 15th of January, at 7:30 in the morning, I was walking from the bedroom to the bathroom on the first floor of the house on Elmwood Drive, and my hip gave way beneath me. That is the most accurate description I can offer. Not that I slipped, not that I stumbled, but that something in my body simply withdrew its support without warning, the way a tide goes out, and I went down. I was on the floor for approximately 40 minutes before I could reach the phone. In those 40 minutes, lying on the landing of my own house, with my hip announcing itself in a language I had never heard it speak before, and the cough making itself known in ways that were no longer ignorable, I had a great deal of time to think. I thought about Emmanuel, who would not have let this happen, not because he would have caught me, but because he would have noticed the cough and made the appointment I had been putting off making, and sat beside me in the waiting room with his reading glasses on and a book he wasn't really reading. I thought about my mother, who fell in her kitchen in Lagos in 2002 and was back on her feet and running the household within 6 weeks, because she had not spent 80 years building a life in order to be defeated by a kitchen floor. I thought about the house on Elmwood Drive, which I had chosen and bought and paid for, and filled with the particular weight of a life lived here, and which had never, until that moment, made me feel small. And then I reached the phone and I called Marcus. He was there within the hour, which is the best that can be said. Renee came with him. Dolores, who had apparently been visiting that week, staying in the guest room, a fact I had been informed of and had said nothing further about, remained in the guest room while Marcus called the ambulance, and Renee stood in the hallway with her arms folded across her chest, looking at me on the floor with an expression I could not quite read. Not cruelty, not warmth. Something in between. Something that looked like calculation being performed very quickly and very quietly behind eyes that were otherwise politely arranged. "We should have had that conversation about a stair lift," she said to Marcus, in the tone of someone who has said this before. To Marcus, not to me. I said nothing. The ambulance came. I was taken to Mercy General. I had a fractured hip and pneumonia, and 11 days in a room on the 4th floor with a strip of sky through the window and a great deal of time to think. And on the 11th day, Amara came with jollof rice and a face full of something she needed to put down. "She moved in 3 days after you were admitted," Amara said. She kept her voice low, though we were alone. "Dolores, Renee told Dad it was just temporary, that someone needed to be in the house to keep an eye on things while you were away." "My house," I said. "Your house," Amara confirmed. And Marcus agreed to this. Renee told him it made sense. She said the house shouldn't sit empty. A pause. "Grandma, she's in your bedroom. Dolores, she's sleeping in your room." The strip of sky was very steady. I looked at it. "What has she moved?" I asked. Amara looked at me carefully. I think she expected me to react differently, to say something sharper, to show some visible disturbance. She is 23, and she has not yet learned that the most significant decisions look, from the outside, like nothing at all. "Your clothes are in the spare room. The ones from your wardrobe." She put them in bags and moved them to the back bedroom. A breath. "She's rearranged the furniture. She brought her own mirror, her own duvet set, her bedside things." I noted all of this. I did not write it down because I did not need to. I have my mother's memory for things that matter. "Grandma," Amara said, "what do you want me to do?" I looked at her. My granddaughter, who had made jollof rice and brought it on the bus, and sat in a plastic chair and told me the truth when no one else had thought to. "Nothing yet," I said. "I want you to go back and tell no one that we had this conversation. Tell them you visited. Tell them I seem tired but in good spirits. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get better," I said. "And then, I'm going to go home." I want to tell you what I was thinking in the days that followed. So, because what I was thinking matters more than anything I said. I was thinking about the deed to the house on Elmwood Drive, which was held in my name alone. Emmanuel and I had discussed putting it in both names in 2003, and I had decided, and Emmanuel had agreed, because Emmanuel trusted my judgment on matters of structure, that we would keep it in mine. There was no particular drama behind this decision. There was no anticipation of crisis. There was simply my mother's voice, pressing a ledger flat with both palms. A woman who does not understand her own money is a woman who will always be asking permission to use it. I was thinking about the accounts, the ones I had been building since 1997, the ones that had grown, quietly and consistently, through 33 years of careful choices. Not lavish, not exciting, not the kind of thing anyone posts about on social media, but real, compound, patient growth. The kind that accumulates the way rivers do, which is by moving around obstacles rather than through them. I was thinking about my solicitor, a man named Gerald Ashworth, whom I had worked with since 2006, and who had drawn up my will and managed my property documentation, and who knew more about the true shape of my finances than anyone in the world except, now, me alone. I was thinking about the fact that Dolores Adebayo was sleeping in my room, in my house, under my roof, using my wardrobe space that her daughter had cleared of my clothes, as though my clothes were inventory being rotated out of season. And I was thinking, let her be comfortable. Comfort makes people careless, and careless people tell you everything you need to know. I had 11 days left in that hospital. I used them to recover, which I did methodically, because I am a woman who approaches recovery the way I approach everything, with a plan, with patience, and with the specific knowledge of my own strength that comes from never having confused performance with power. I called Gerald Ashworth on the 14th of January. I asked him to schedule a meeting for the week I was discharged. I asked him to pull the property documentation and the account statements and to have everything current and in order. "Are you all right, Vivienne?" Gerald asked. He is 67 years old and has known me since before Emmanuel died, and is one of the few people in the world I trust without reservation. "I am more all right than anyone knows," I said. There was a pause. "I see," Gerald said, which meant that he did see, actually, because Gerald is also a person who listens beneath the surface of what is said. "I'll have everything ready." "One more thing," I said. "The house on Elmwood Drive. I want to confirm the current title documentation." "Still in your name only," Gerald said, without even checking. "I filed the updated deed in 2019, as you requested." "Thank you," I said. I set the phone down. I looked at the parking structure and the strip of pewter sky. Outside, the January afternoon was doing what January afternoons do in Leicester, presenting itself as evidence that joy is a provisional thing, easily withdrawn. I have never agreed with this. Emmanuel always said I was constitutionally opposed to the idea that circumstances decided anything permanent, and he was right. I was going home. And when I got home, I was not going to say a word about Dolores Adebayo in my bedroom, in my wardrobe, in my mirror, under my roof. I was going to be pleasant. I was going to be tired from the journey, grateful for the help, glad that someone had been keeping an eye on things. I was going to say exactly what was expected of me, and no more than that. And I was going to watch. Because here is what my mother understood that her mother taught her, and that she pressed flat in a leather ledger in Lagos in 1967. The woman who speaks first loses the frame. The woman who waits, who observes, who lets the others believe they are ahead, she is the one who decides, in the end, where the frame goes. I was 71 years old. I had built this life with my hands and my mind, and 43 years of showing up and not flinching. I had paid for that house, a note by careful note, and I had built what was in those accounts, choice by patient choice, and I had raised a son who was good even if he was not always paying attention, and I had buried the man I loved with the dignity he deserved, and I had kept going. Dolores Adebayo was in my room. I was going to let her stay there for now, and I was going to be very, very pleasant, and I was going to let everyone in that house believe that the woman coming home from the hospital was exactly what they expected. Tired, grateful, diminished. And I was going to watch what they did when they thought no one was watching. Because I have always been watching. The discharge came on a Friday morning, cold and clear, with frost on the car windows that Marcus had not quite cleared before he came in to collect me. Aunt Renee was with him. She had dressed carefully, I noticed, not for me, but for the optics of the moment, the way people dress when they know they are being observed, even if they believe the observer has less power than they do. Her coat was deep burgundy, Her hair was freshly done. She looked like a woman performing the role of supportive daughter-in-law rather than inhabiting it, but the performance was technically accomplished. "Mom," Marcus said, and hugged me too hard at the shoulder, and then apologized, and then hugged me again more carefully. "You look so much better." "I am better," I said. "The house is all ready for you," Renee said. "We've been making sure everything was looked after." "I appreciate that," I said. And I looked at her with the warmth I am genuinely capable of, the warmth that does not perform anything because it comes from a real place, the place where I love my son, and I am not without generosity even toward the people who are doing things they should not be doing. I looked at her, and I smiled, and I let her help me to the car, and I watched as we pulled out of the hospital car park and into the gray January morning, her exhale, small, slight, satisfied. The exhale of a woman who believes the difficult part is over. It was not over. It had not yet begun. The house on Elmwood Drive is a 4-bedroom Victorian, semi-detached, on a quiet residential street in the Stonygate area of Leicester, here with bay windows on the ground floor and a small garden at the back that Emmanuel planted in 1993, and that I have maintained since his death with the same stubbornness I apply to everything I have decided to keep. The wisteria on the back fence has been there since 1997. The magnolia tree at the garden's eastern edge produces flowers every April that Emmanuel called excessive, and I called glorious, and we never resolved the disagreement, which is one of the things I miss most about him. I had lived in that house for 32 years. I knew every sound it made, the specific creak of the third stair, the way the kitchen radiator clicked before it came on in the morning, the particular draft from the landing window that told you the temperature had dropped below 5 degrees without you having to look outside. I knew the house the way you know a body you have inhabited for decades. Not consciously, not in the way of visitors cataloging features, but in the way of someone for whom the building itself is an extension of self, a peripheral awareness, present even when unattended. So when Marcus carried my bag through the front door, and I stepped over the threshold of my own home for the first time in 11 days, I noticed. The hallway smelled different. Not wrong, exactly. Clean, even, which should have been unremarkable. But the particular layering of smell that belongs to a long-inhabited house, the combination of cooking and old woodwork, and the specific soap I have used for 30 years, and something underneath all of it that is simply time, accumulated, was altered. There was a perfume in it, heavy-based, and floral in a way that announced itself rather than drifting. Dolores's perfume I recognized from Christmas, from the hallway at Marcus and Renee's flat, from every enclosed space I had shared with her in 5 years of family gatherings. Her perfume was in the walls of my house. I breathed it in and I said nothing. "Let me take your coat," Renee said, and she did. And she hung it on the hook by the door with the careful efficiency of a woman performing hospitality on territory she has already claimed in her mind. I noticed that the second hook, Emmanuel's hook, which had held his coats for 26 years, and which I had left empty since 2015 in the way of a person who is not ready to fill certain spaces, held a coat that was not mine. A large wool blend coat in olive green that I had never seen before. I looked at it for exactly as long as it took to register it. Then I turned toward the kitchen. "Tea?" I asked. Dolores was in the living room. I knew she would be. I had known since Amara told me, and I had arranged my face accordingly over 11 days of quiet practice, the way you arrange furniture in a room before guests arrive, deliberately, with thought given to what each piece will be expected to bear. She was in the armchair by the window, Emmanuel's armchair, the one with the slightly flattened left arm, where he rested his elbow when he read. She was reading a magazine. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and the expression that crossed her face was quick and complicated. Surprise, recalibration, and then, settling over everything like a glaze, a warmth that was performed rather than felt. "Vivian," she said, standing, "you're home. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," I said. Dolores, what a surprise! I didn't know you were visiting. And there it was. The smallest possible pause, the duration of a breath half held, before she smiled. Renee asked me to come and keep an eye on things. You know, with the house being empty. That's very kind of you, I said, and I meant it to sound sincere, and I believe it did, because I am a woman who has spent 71 years meaning things with precision, and sincerity is a tone I can locate reliably, even when what surrounds it is something else entirely. Marcus came in with tea. Renee came in behind him. We sat, Dolores in Emmanuel's armchair, Marcus and Renee on the sofa, Mai in the upright chair by the fireplace that I have always preferred because it keeps my back straight and gives me a clear sightline to the room. We drank tea. We talked about the weather and the hospital food and Marcus's work and a cousin of Renee's who was getting married in the spring. I held my mug in both hands and I was present and engaged and interested and tired in exactly the right proportion. Because a woman who has just come home from 11 days in hospital is expected to be tired, and I was not going to disappoint the expectation. At no point did anyone mention that Dolores was sleeping in my room. At no point did I ask. I made an excuse about needing to rest at 4:30. Hi Renee offered to show me to my room, a sentence I noted with full attention, and I thanked her and said I could manage. I knew the house, and I watched something cross her face at that. A flicker of something she recalibrated as quickly as Dolores had, which suggested to me that she had practiced this, had thought about this moment, had considered how to handle the return of the woman whose room she had given to her mother. What she had not considered, I think, was that the woman returning might not make a scene about it. The drama Renee had prepared for, the confrontation, the upset, the clear evidence of a woman who was not coping well with her circumstances, was not available to her because I did not provide it. I went upstairs. I went to the back bedroom, which is the smallest of the four, one which faces north and gets almost no direct light, in which my clothes had been folded and placed in carrier bags and stacked against the wall, where a wardrobe has never stood because there was never any reason to put one there. The bed in the back bedroom is a 3/4, with a mattress that is perfectly adequate for guests and deeply uncomfortable for a woman recovering from a fractured hip, who is accustomed to sleeping in a king-size bed that she chose herself in 2008 and has slept in every night since. I sat on the edge of the 3/4 mattress. I looked at the carrier bags full of my clothes. I looked at the north-facing window and the wall of the house next door beyond it. I did not feel what you might expect me to feel in that moment. The anger was there. Of course it was there. I am not a woman without feeling. But it was not the spiking, urgent kind of anger that demands immediate expression. It was the settled, patient kind, the kind that knows it will get its moment and does not need to borrow against it prematurely. I thought about my mother's ledger, every wrong entered, every figure precise, every balance carried forward. I stood up. I changed into my house clothes. I put my wash bag on the windowsill and arranged what I needed for the night on the small table by the bed. And then I lay down carefully, on my side, with my hip positioned as the physiotherapist had shown me, and I looked at the north-facing window, and I listened to the house. I could hear Dolores moving in my room, the specific sound of my floorboards, which I know as I know music I have heard all my life, transposed to a different score. The creak of my wardrobe door, my wardrobe, in my room, into which Dolores had placed whatever she had brought to fill a space she had no right to occupy. The television coming on, a program I did not recognize. Volume set slightly too loud for someone who lives alone, set at the volume of someone who has never had to consider the habits of other people sleeping near them. I noted all of this. I slept. I want to tell you about the first week, because the first week is where a person's real character becomes visible. Not in the dramatic moments, the confrontations, the revelations, the things people say when they know they are being witnessed, but in the daily texture of how they inhabit space that does not belong to them. Dolores was, by the evidence of the first week, A woman who had decided that my house was now an extension of her daughter's house, which was itself an extension of her own. She came downstairs each morning before I did, which required some effort on her part, because I am an early riser, and this meant she was rising in my house at 6:15, 6:30, moving through my kitchen with the ease of a woman who has been making herself at home in other people's spaces for so long that it no longer registers as anything to account for. She reorganized my kitchen. This is the thing I most want you to sit with, because it is the thing that tells you everything. Not dramatically, not in one comprehensive overhaul, nothing so obvious, but in increments across the first week, the way erosion works. One small change that is individually explicable, collectively transformative. The spice rack moved from the left of the hob to the right because, she explained pleasantly, when I happened to come down while she was doing it, it's easier to reach when you're cooking. My tea caddy relocated from the counter to the inside of a cupboard to clear a bit of worktop space. My cast iron skillet, which hangs on a hook beside the cooker, because I have always hung it on a hook beside the cooker, and it is the first thing I reach for in the morning, moved to a shelf at the back of the upper cabinet because it looked cluttered. And I said each time, "Oh, I see, yes, thank you." And I watched. What I was watching was not merely Dolores. I was watching Renee, who came every day that first week, for legitimate reasons, practical reasons, the reasons of a daughter-in-law attending to a convalescing mother-in-law, which all made perfect sense individually and made a different kind of sense when you looked at them together. She came to check on my meals. She came to make sure I was taking my medication. She came to sit with me in the afternoons and ask how I was feeling and to talk, pleasantly, about plans. Plans. The word appeared more than once. "We were thinking," she said on the third day, "that it might be worth considering the back bedroom as a more permanent arrangement. For safety, you know. One level would really be better for the hip." I looked at her. "My bedroom is on the first floor," I said. "It always has been." "Of course," Renee said. "But going forward, it might be—" "I'll be back in my room by the end of the week," I said pleasantly. "I'm healing well. The physiotherapist was very happy with my progress." Another pause. Another recalibration. "Of course," Renee said again. "I just meant in the longer term it might be something to think about." "I'll think about it," I said. I thought about Gerald Ashworth instead. Shati came to the house on the Thursday of the first week, which required some management on my part. I needed to ensure that I was alone in the house for the duration of the meeting, which meant understanding Dolores's schedule, which I had been quietly mapping since my return. Dolores, I had established, went to her daughter's flat every Thursday afternoon for what she called their time together, returning in the early evening. This gave me from 2 o'clock until approximately 6. Marcus was at work. Renee was at work. Amara, she who I had called on the Wednesday evening, with a message she understood perfectly. "I would love some company tomorrow morning, but I have an appointment in the afternoon, so perhaps just the morning," came for the morning and left before 2, glancing at me with her mother's wide-set eyes as she kissed my cheek at the door, saying nothing that needed to be said. Gerald arrived at 2:15. He is a tall man with the kind of stillness that comes from having been a lawyer for 40 years and having learned that most situations resolve themselves better when the person with the information says less than the person without it expects them to. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, which I had reset to its original configuration, spice rack on the left, tea caddy on the counter. Now because I am a woman who lives in my own house, and I will have my spice rack where I want it. And he laid out the documents. The property deed to 14 Elmwood Drive, Leicester, registered in the sole name of Vivian Cecile Aquifer Brooks since November 1991. Updated and reconfirmed in 2019. The account statements. 3 accounts held in my name, 2 of which no member of my family knew existed. 1 of which even Emmanuel had not known about in its full form, though he had known about its origins, because we had agreed. back in 1997, back when my mother's voice was still close enough to hear clearly, that there were certain things a woman kept for herself, not out of dishonesty, but out of the deep structural wisdom of knowing that circumstances change and that the only certainty is the preparation you have already made. The will. Clear. Eden precise. Current. Updated in 2021, after a conversation with Gerald in which I had made certain adjustments that I will tell you about in their proper time. And one other document, which I had asked Gerald to prepare in the 2 weeks since I had called him from my hospital room. I looked at the documents. Gerald looked at me. "Everything is in order," he said. "Everything is always in order," I said, and meant it, and he smiled in the way of a man who has known me long enough to believe it. "How would you like to proceed?" he asked. "Slowly," I said, "and quietly." "My two preferred speeds," Gerald said. We talked for 2 hours. I told him everything, not emotionally, because emotion is not what Gerald is for, but accurately, because accuracy is. I told him about the bedroom, the reorganized kitchen, Renee's comments about the back bedroom as a longer-term arrangement, the perfume in the hallway, the olive green coat on Emmanuel's hook, the specific quality of Dolores's comfort in my house, which was not the comfort of a guest, but the comfort of a woman who has been told, by someone with authority, she has not actually got, that this space is hers to inhabit. Gerald listened. He made 2 notes. He asked one question. "Has either Renee or Marcus asked you to sign anything?" "Not yet," I said. "Not yet," Gerald repeated, and wrote something down. "They will," I said. "Yes," Gerald said. "I think they will." The document that Renee asked me to sign was not, in itself, a dramatic thing. This is what I want you to understand about the way certain kinds of plans work. They are not dramatic. They are incremental. They arrive in ordinary language, dressed in the vocabulary of care and practicality, and family and concern. And if you are not watching carefully, if you have not been taught, by a woman who kept her ledger in a tin box under the bed, to read beneath the surface of things, they can seem like entirely reasonable suggestions from people who love you. It was a Tuesday evening, 11 days after my return from hospital. Marcus was there. Renee was there. Dolores had gone to her room, my room, at 9 o'clock with her magazine and her television turned slightly too loud. The 3 of us sat in the living room, and Renee produced a folder from her bag. And from the folder, she produced a form. "We've been talking," Renee said, "and we thought it might be a good idea, just as a practical measure, to get some paperwork in place, in case there's ever a situation where someone needs to make decisions on your behalf quickly, medical decisions, financial decisions." "Renee is right," Marcus said, with the look of a man who has been persuaded of something and is now persuading someone else of it, which is a different thing from believing it yourself, but produces a similar surface appearance. I looked at the form. It was a lasting power of attorney application. Financial and property. Marcus named as primary attorney. Renee named as secondary. I held the form in both hands, the way my mother held her ledger. I read it carefully from the beginning, while Renee talked about convenience and peace of mind, and how it was simply sensible to have these things in place, how everyone was doing it, show how it would mean that if anything happened, I wouldn't have to worry about things being managed. I would not have to worry about things being managed. I set the form down on the coffee table. I looked at my son. His face was earnest and slightly uncomfortable, the face of a man who knows he is participating in something that has been organized by someone else, but who has not fully examined what that something is. "Marcus," I said, "do you know what this form does?" He looked at Renee briefly, just briefly, and I caught it, and I filed it, then back at me. "It means that if you're ever incapacitated—" "It means that if I sign this form," I said pleasantly, "you and Renee have the legal authority to make decisions about my finances and my property, including this house. For your protection," Renee said. "That's all it is." I already have a solicitor, I said. I have had a solicitor since 2006, Gerald Ashworth. He has my full documentation and my will and my property records, and we speak regularly. I am very well protected. A pause. This would just be an additional. I appreciate the thought, I said. I'll take it to Gerald and ask him to look it over. Of course, Renee said. Of course. That's very sensible. She said it in the tone of someone who expected the conversation to have gone differently, who had prepared for a certain set of responses, and was now holding a folder full of unused material. She gathered the form from the coffee table with the unhurried movement of a woman who is not alarmed, not yet, because she believes she has time, because she has not understood yet that the woman sitting across from her, with the straight back and the pleasant expression, has been watching her for 11 days and making notes that do not require paper to hold. I'll think about it, I said. And I would. I would think about it with Gerald, and we would understand exactly what it was, and we would decide together what to do about it. But that was not the most important thing that happened that Tuesday evening. The most important thing happened at 8:15, when Marcus went to the kitchen to make more tea, and Renee took a call in the hallway, and I sat alone in the living room for approximately 4 minutes, and I did something I had been waiting to do. Renee's folder was on the coffee table. She had replaced the LPA form in it, but had not closed it fully. A small ordinary negligence, the kind that happens when a person is slightly rattled and slightly performing composure, and is not quite as precise as they normally are. I did not touch the folder. I did not need to, because the top edge of a document was visible at the folder's opening, and what I could see of it was enough. It was printed on headed paper. I could read the header, the name of a firm I did not recognize, with an address in Nottingham. Below the header, partially visible, a reference number. And beneath that, 3 words that were fully legible because they were in a slightly larger font, the way legal documents sometimes use a slightly larger font for the thing they are actually about. The 3 words were Property Transfer Agreement. For Marcus came back with the tea. I smiled at him. I said nothing. That night, I lay in the back bedroom, the north-facing room with the inadequate mattress and the carrier bags of my clothes against the wall. And I looked at the ceiling, and I listened to the house, and I thought with the full precision of a woman who has been keeping accounts for 50 years. Renee had not asked me to sign an LPA out of concern. She had asked me to sign an LPA because an LPA, once signed and registered, would give her and Marcus the authority to act on my behalf in financial matters, which would include the transfer of property. Dolores was in my room not because someone needed to keep an eye on the house. Dolores was in my room because someone had decided that the house was going to change hands, and they had wanted to begin establishing presence before they established paperwork. And what they had not known, what they could not have known, because I am a woman who keeps her ledger in a tin box under the bed, was that the house on Elmwood Drive was held in my name alone, with full documentation registered and updated, and that any attempt to transfer it without my explicit consent was not merely a legal impossibility, but was, in fact, the kind of thing that Gerald Ashworth would characterize as attempted financial abuse of an elder person, which carries consequences that are not small and are not pleasant and cannot be undone by being sorry about them afterward. They had built their plan on a set of assumptions about who I was, about how much I knew, about how clearly I could see what was being arranged around me. They had assumed, because I had not argued, because I had said of course and I appreciate the thought and I'll think about it, that I did not understand what I was looking at. This is the oldest mistake in the world. It is the mistake that people make about women who do not shout. It is the mistake that people make about mothers who have always been there, who have always managed things, who have always made the arrangements that kept everyone comfortable, and who are therefore seen as arrangements themselves. Permanent fixtures of the background, grateful for whatever space is allotted to them, unlikely to have an interior life that includes a solicitor in Leicester, and 3 investment accounts, and a property deed registered in their sole name. It is the mistake my mother was warned about. By her mother, in Lagos, in 1947. I thought about Amara, who had brought jollof rice on a bus to a hospital on a Tuesday afternoon and told me the truth. I thought about Emmanuel, who had trusted my judgment on matters of structure. I thought about Gerald Ashworth, who had said not yet with a precision I recognized. I thought about the carrier bags of my clothes against the north-facing wall, and I thought, I have been patient long enough. Not longer than necessary, exactly as long as necessary, not a day more. I have what I need. I have watched what I needed to watch. I have let them believe what they needed to believe. I have 11 days of notes that do not require paper to hold, and a document partially visible in a folder on my coffee table, and a solicitor who is expecting my call in the morning. I reached for my phone. I set an alarm for 6 o'clock. Then I put the phone face down on the small table beside the three-quarter bed in the north-facing room of my own house, and I closed my eyes, and I slept the deep, settled sleep of a woman who has decided what she is going to do. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The call to Gerald came at 6:45, after I had made my tea. Spice rack back on the left, tea caddy on the counter, cast iron skillet on its hook, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the back garden, at the wisteria and the magnolia tree, and at the frost that had settled on the grass overnight, and that would be gone by 9. I need to move quickly, I told Gerald, before he could say good morning. I'll explain everything, but I need you to prepare 2 things. Tell me, Gerald said. I told him about the property transfer agreement. I told him about the LPA form and the named attorneys and the folder left imprecisely closed on my coffee table. I told him about Dolores in my room and the 11 days of accumulated evidence that I had been carrying without paper since the Tuesday afternoon, when my granddaughter sat in a plastic hospital chair and told me the truth. Gerald was quiet for a moment when I finished. Vivienne, he said, I want to be certain I understand what you're describing. You believe that your daughter-in-law and son are in the process of arranging a transfer of your property, using an LPA as the legal mechanism, while simultaneously establishing occupancy of your home through a third party. That is what I believe, I said, and you have not confronted them. I have not. And they believe you are unaware. They believe I am tired and grateful, and perhaps somewhat diminished by the fall and the hospital, I said. They believe exactly what I have allowed them to believe. Another pause. The property transfer agreement document. You're certain of the header. I am certain of what I read. I could not see the full document, but I have the name of the firm and a partial reference number. I heard Gerald writing. I can make inquiries, he said, carefully and without alerting anyone. Yes, I said. And the 2 things I need prepared. Go ahead. I told him the first thing, and he said he could have it ready within 48 hours. I told him the second thing, and there was a pause of a different kind, the pause of a man who has known a woman for 17 years and is recognizing something in her voice that he has not heard before, or perhaps has heard once, very early on, when she sat across from him for the first time and told him what she needed, and he understood within the first 10 minutes that she was not a woman who came to meetings to be managed. Are you certain? He asked. I have been certain since the hospital, I said. Then I'll have it ready in 48 hours, Gerald said. Both of them. I set the phone down. I finished my tea. I washed the mug and set it on the drying rack in the correct position. And I straightened the tea caddy, and I looked out at the garden. The frost was already beginning to lift. The magnolia tree's bare branches caught the morning light. I had 32 years of that garden. I had planted the wisteria myself in 1997 on a Saturday afternoon in April with Emmanuel holding the guide wire and telling me I was putting it too close to the fence. He had been wrong about that. It had grown exactly as I expected, following the wire I had positioned precisely, trained by the attention I had given it over 26 years into the shape I had always intended it to take. I thought about what was coming. I thought about Marcus, who loved me genuinely, and who had not understood what was being built around both of us. I thought about Renee, who had looked at my house and seen an opportunity, and had moved her mother into my bedroom with the confidence of someone who had run the calculation and found it in her favor. I thought about Dolores, asleep upstairs in my room, with her magazine and her perfume, and her olive green coat on Emmanuel's hook in my hallway, comfortable in the way of someone who has been told they have nothing to worry about. And I thought, they have been making assumptions about who is keeping the ledger. It was time to let them see the ledger. Not yet. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until Gerald had prepared what I needed, and I had confirmed what I suspected, and everything was in its place. But soon. The frost lifted from the garden. The magnolia branches held the light. I was going home, properly, in every sense that the word is capable of carrying. And no one, not Renee, not Dolores, not a folder left imprecisely closed on my coffee table, was going to stop me. Gerald called me on the Thursday afternoon with the confirmation I had been waiting for. The firm on the headed paper was a property and conveyancing practice in Nottingham called Whitfield and Partners. They were, Gerald's inquiries established, a legitimate firm specializing in residential property transfers, with no particular reputation for anything irregular except a willingness to work quickly when clients required it. What Gerald's contact at the land registry had been able to establish, carefully, without triggering any notifications, was that a preliminary inquiry had been filed against the title of 14 Elmwood Drive approximately 6 weeks earlier, before my fall, before the hospital. And 6 weeks before, I had come home to find Dolores in my room and my clothes in carrier bags against a north-facing wall. 6 weeks. I held that number when Gerald told me, turned it over the way you turn a stone in your hand. 6 weeks before my fall, someone had engaged a conveyancing firm in Nottingham to make preliminary inquiries about the title to my house. My fall had happened in January. The inquiry had been filed in November, which meant that in November, while I was cooking Sunday lunch and attending to the garden's winter preparation and visiting Marcus and Renee for what I had believed was an ordinary dinner, someone had already begun the paperwork. I was not the kind of woman who required this information to be angry in order to act on it. The anger was its own thing, contained and useful, suck a temperature rather than a weather system. What the information did was clarify the timeline, which clarified the plan, which clarified what the plan had required. The fall had not been anticipated. I understood that. The fall had been, for Renee, an unexpected gift, a sudden providential compression of a timeline that had originally been more gradual. The LPA that she had placed in front of me on Tuesday evening had likely been planned for a different kind of approach, a slower establishment of concern, a longer period of quiet suggestion about my declining capacity, a more organic-seeming arrival at the moment where I might agree that it made sense to let someone else handle things. My fall had collapsed all of that into something more urgent, more immediate, and, she had calculated, more exploitable. A woman who had just been hospitalized, who was recovering from a fracture, who was tired and grateful, and perhaps somewhat diminished. This was a better moment than most. She had not counted on what I had been doing for the 11 days she thought I was simply recovering. "The title is clean," Gerald said. "Nothing has been registered against it. The preliminary inquiry is just that, preliminary. It requires your explicit consent and signature to proceed." "Which I have not given," I said. "Which you have not given," Gerald confirmed. "And which, I should tell you clearly, you are under no obligation whatsoever to give." "I know that," I said. "I know you know that," Gerald said. I'm telling you because I will be telling certain other people the same thing in the near future, and I want the language to be consistent. The documents are ready? I asked. Both of them, Gerald said. I can bring them Saturday morning. Saturday morning, I said. Yes. I set the phone down. Dolores was upstairs. I could hear her, the familiar overlay of my own floorboards transposed beneath unfamiliar weight. The television in my room. The specific creak of my wardrobe door. Saturday morning. On Friday, I did 3 things. The first was that I called Amara and asked her to come for lunch on Saturday. I told her to bring herself and nothing else, and that I needed her to be there at noon, which was after Gerald's arrival and before Marcus and Renee typically arrived on weekend afternoons. She said yes without asking why, which is one of the things I love most about her. The second was that I went into the living room in the afternoon while Dolores was in the kitchen, where she had once again reorganized something. I could hear the particular sound of my cupboard doors being opened and assessed. And I made a phone call to Marcus. I told him I would like him and Renee to come for dinner Saturday evening. I said I had been thinking about the LPA, and I wanted to discuss it properly, together, and that I thought it was time we all had a real conversation. Marcus said that sounded like a great idea. He would let Renee know. They would bring food. No need, I said. I'll cook. A pause. Mom, you're still recovering. I cooked through a mortgage, 2 children, 34 years of professional work, and your father's entire career, I said. I can manage a Saturday dinner. He laughed. He said he would be there at 6. The third thing I did on Friday was go upstairs. Not to my room. I stood outside the door of my room, the closed door of my own bedroom, and I listened to the television inside, and I breathed steadily, and I thought about everything that had brought me to this precise point on this precise landing, and then I turned and went back downstairs. I was not ready to go in yet. I was going to wait until I had everything I needed. This is a discipline I learned from accounts. You do not make the entry until the figures are confirmed. You wait. You verify. You ensure the balance is correct before you commit it to the record. Saturday was when the figures would be confirmed. Gerald arrived at 10:30 Saturday morning, which was earlier than expected. Yeah, and I was glad of it, because it gave us 90 minutes before Amara arrived, and the afternoon before Marcus and Renee would appear. He sat at my kitchen table, spice rack on the left, tea caddy on the counter, cast iron skillet on its hook, everything precisely as I had arranged it, and precisely as it had been for 32 years. And he laid out the 2 documents, and we went through them together. The first document was a formal letter, drafted on Gerald Ashworth's firm letterhead, addressed to Whitfield and Partners in Nottingham. It informed them, in the precise and courteous language that solicitors use when they are telling other solicitors that something is not going to happen, that 14 Elmwood Drive, Leicester, was held in the sole name of Vivian Cecile Okafor Brooks, that no power of attorney of any description had been granted to any third party, that the property owner had been made aware of the preliminary title inquiry and had instructed her solicitor accordingly, and that any further inquiries or applications related to this property should be directed to Gerald's firm rather than to any individual family member. The second document was something I had asked Gerald to draft without fully explaining why to him, though I believed he had understood. It was a letter of intended action, a formal document stating my intention, as the sole owner of 14 Elmwood Drive, to exercise my rights in relation to the property, including the right to determine who resided in it and on what terms. It was not a notice to quit. It was not yet that. It was, rather, a statement of position, a formal articulation, drafted in language that was not aggressive but was absolutely clear, that I was aware of my rights, that I had legal representation, and that I intended to exercise those rights fully. Gerald had included a third element I had not requested, but that I was grateful for, a 1-page summary, in plain English, of what an LPA meant and what it did not mean, and what the legal consequences were of attempting to use one for purposes that did not align with the donor's genuine wishes. It was written in the tone of information rather than accusation. It was the tone of a woman who has decided that clarity is the most generous thing she can offer. Are you planning to present these tomorrow? Gerald asked. Tonight, I said. At dinner. Gerald looked at me steadily. Vivienne, do you want me to be present? I thought about it. I thought about my mother, who had never needed anyone to stand beside her when she opened the ledger, because the ledger was its own sufficient argument. No, I said, but I want you available by phone if anything requires immediate clarification. I'll be home all evening, Gerald said. We shook hands at the door. He paused on the step, his coat collar turned up against the February cold, and he looked at me with the expression he sometimes has, which is the expression of a man who has practiced restraint for so long that warmth occasionally escapes around its edges. Emmanuel would have found this very satisfying, he said. Emmanuel would have found it entirely unsurprising, I said. Gerald smiled. He went down the path. I closed the door. Amara arrived at noon with a small bunch of freesias from the market, which I put in the blue jug on the kitchen windowsill that has held flowers since 1993. And we sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. Not the version I had been performing for the past 3 weeks, not the tired and grateful version, but the real version, the full version, the version that included Gerald and the property deed and the preliminary inquiry filed in November, and the 2 documents now sitting in a brown folder on the kitchen counter. Amara listened with the stillness of her grandmother and the directness of her mother and the particular quality of a 23-year-old who has not yet learned to soften the truth on behalf of other people's comfort. When I finished, she said, "What do you need me to do tonight?" "I need you to be there," I said. "I need a witness. Not to intervene. I want to be clear about that. I do not need protection, and I do not need defending. I simply need someone in the room who I trust, who knows the full story, and who will remember accurately what is said." "I can do that," Amara said. "I know you can," I said. "It's why I called you." She looked at the freesias in the blue jug. "Grandma," she said, "what happens to Dad?" I had thought about this more than anything else. More than the documents, more than the timeline, more than the specific wrong of Dolores in my room and my clothes in carrier bags. What happened to Marcus was the question that had no clean answer, because Marcus was not a villain in this story. He was something more complicated and more forgivable, and ultimately more disappointing, which is a particular kind of grief that has no efficient language. "Your father made choices," I said. "Some of them he made knowing what he was choosing. Some of them he made without fully understanding that he was choosing at all. Both of those things are true, and both of them have consequences. What I hope, what I genuinely hope, is that tonight is the beginning of him understanding the difference." Amara nodded slowly. "And Renee?" "Renee is a more capable woman than she has used her capability for," I said. "That is her business. What happens to her is between her and the choices she has made." We ate lunch. We talked about Amara's course, her dissertation, the boy she was not quite calling her boyfriend, but whom she mentioned 3 times in 40 minutes. I listened and I asked questions, and I was, for those 2 hours, simply her grandmother. The woman who had known her since she was 4 days old, who had been the constant address in a childhood divided between houses, who had told her the truth on a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital room because she needed it. At 2:30, Amara helped me set the table for dinner. 6 places. I used the good tablecloth, the Irish linen one that comes out for occasions. I used Emmanuel's best glasses, the ones from the cupboard that Dolores had not thought to reorganize. I set the table with the care I have always brought to the things that matter, because setting a table well is a form of respect, for the occasion, for the people who will sit at it, for the truth that is going to be spoken across it. Dolores came downstairs at 3:30, saw the table, and smiled in the pleased way of someone who imagines they are a reason for celebration. "A proper dinner," she said. "How lovely." "How lovely," I agreed. I cooked eggsy soup with Ibi. which is what my mother cooked when she wanted the food itself to be a statement. It takes time. It requires attention. It cannot be rushed or delegated or abbreviated. I stood at the stove in my own kitchen, with my spice rack on the left and my skillet on its hook, and I cooked the way I have cooked my whole life, with the full focus of a woman who does not do anything partially. Dolores offered to help 3 times. I thanked her warmly each time and found her something simple and peripheral to do, setting bread on a board, fetching water, so that she was occupied and included, and not in my way. Marcus and Renee arrived at 6. Renee was wearing the burgundy coat again, which I noted without comment. She carried wine, a bottle I recognized as expensive, the kind of gesture that contains within it an expectation of reciprocal goodwill. She kissed my cheek. She commented on the soup smell with genuine appreciation, because Renee is a woman with real tastes who has buried them under strategic calculation, which is always a particular kind of sadness. Marcus hugged me. He looked, as he sometimes does, when he has been managing multiple things at once, slightly transparent, the tiredness showing through. We sat, all 6 of us, me at the head of the table, my seat, the seat I had reclaimed without announcement simply by sitting in it, and Marcus to my left, Renee beside him, Dolores across, and Amara to my right, which was where she had always sat since she was small enough to need help reaching the table. I served. We ate. The conversation was the conversation of a family dinner, comfortable, wandering, touching on ordinary things. Marcus talked about a project at work. Renee mentioned a friend's new house. Dolores talked about her other grandchildren, with the slight competitive edge she always brings to the subject of grandchildren, as though they were a category of achievement to be ranked. I listened. I asked questions. I was warm and present and interested. And at 8 o'clock, when the plates had been cleared and the tea was made and we were sitting with our cups in the particular ease that follows a good meal, I stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with the brown folder. I set it on the table in front of me. I sat down. I folded my hands on top of it. The room changed. Not dramatically. There was no single thing that changed it, no announcement, no shift in volume. But it changed, the way a room changes when a window is opened in winter. A subtle and immediate recalibration of temperature, of what is present, of what must now be attended to. Renee looked at the folder. Then she looked at me. "I'd like to talk about a few things," I said. "I want to do it calmly, and I want to do it honestly, and I want everyone in this room to be able to say afterward that they were treated with respect. Is that something everyone can agree to?" Marcus nodded immediately, with the reflex of a man who agrees to things before he understands them. Dolores looked at her daughter. Renee looked at the folder. "Of course," Renee said. "Good," I said. "Then let me begin with something that I think will be useful for everyone to understand clearly." I opened the folder. I took out Gerald's letter to Whitfield and Partners, and I placed it on the table, face up, where everyone could see the heading and the address. "This is a letter from my solicitor to a conveyancing firm in Nottingham," I said. "It informs them that the title to this house has been confirmed as held in my sole name, that no power of attorney has been granted to any party, and that any further inquiries regarding this property should be directed through my legal representation." The silence was complete. I watched Renee's face. She was a capable woman, as I had said to Amara, and capable women do not show everything. But there is a particular quality of stillness that is not composure. It is the stillness of recalibration, of a person who has encountered something they were not prepared to encounter and is running through the available responses very quickly, behind eyes that are otherwise professionally arranged. Marcus was looking at the letter. He was reading it. I could see the moment understanding arrived, because his face did something it rarely does, which is become uncertain in a way that is genuine rather than performed. "Mum," he said, "what is—" "Let me finish," I said. "And then I'll answer questions." He closed his mouth. I took out the second document, the letter of intended action, and placed it beside the first. I explained what it was in plain terms. I explained what I intended, which was to exercise my rights as the sole owner of this property in every relevant regard, including the right to determine who lived in it. I looked at Dolores when I said that. She was very still. The practiced warmth had left her face entirely, and what was underneath it was something more honest. Not anger, not shame, but the particular look of a woman who has placed a bet on someone else's hand and is understanding, for the first time, that the hand was not what she was told it was. "Renee," I said, and my voice was level and warm and absolutely clear. "I want you to know that I am not doing this to harm you. I'm doing this because I found a document in your folder 3 weeks ago that I recognized, and because I have spent the time since then confirming what I needed to confirm. I know about the preliminary inquiry. I know when it was filed. I know what it was intended to facilitate." Renee said nothing. "I also want you to know," I said, "that I understand some of what you were thinking. This house is valuable. My situation seemed, perhaps, easier to manage than it was. I have spent the last 3 weeks allowing you to believe that I was not paying attention, and I can see that this was, from a certain angle, a kind of cruelty on my part. I want to acknowledge that." A long silence. "What I cannot allow," I said, "is for my house to be transferred, or for my financial independence to be placed in anyone else's hands, or for my bedroom to be occupied by someone who has no right to be in it, under the assumption that I am a woman who does not know the value of what she holds." Dolores stood up. It was the movement of a woman who is used to making entrances and exits that end conversations, who has spent her life deploying the drama of her own departure as a form of control. She pushed her chair back, and she looked at Renee, and she said, "I'm not going to sit here and be spoken to like this." "Dolores," I said very gently, "I haven't finished. Please sit down." She did not sit down, but she did not leave either. She stood behind her chair with her hands on its back, and I held her gaze, and I said, still gently, "You are welcome in my house as a guest, on any occasion when I have invited you. You are not welcome in my bedroom. I would like you to move your belongings out of my room tomorrow morning, and I would like you to stay with Renee and Marcus for the remainder of your visit. This is not a request." Dolores looked at Renee. Renee was looking at the table. "Renee," Dolores said, "are you going to—" "Mum," Renee said. Her voice was quiet. "Please sit down." It was the first thing Renee had said since I opened the folder, and it landed with a weight that surprised me, not in its content, but in its tone, which was not defiant, and was not composed, and was something closer to exhausted. The tone of a woman who has been running a plan and has just understood, fully, that it is over. She looked up at me. "I want to explain," she said. "I would like you to," I said. What Renee told me, in the next 40 minutes, was not everything, but it was enough, and I want to be honest with you about what it contained, because these stories are easy to flatten into simple shapes, and the truth is rarely a simple shape. Renee and Marcus had debt. Not catastrophic debt, not the debt of recklessness, but the accumulated debt of a life lived slightly beyond its means for slightly longer than was sustainable. A second car, an expensive holiday, school fees for a child from Marcus's first marriage that had not been fully planned for, a kitchen renovation that had cost more than the quote. It was the debt of people who had believed the forward momentum of their lives would carry them past it, and had found instead that the momentum had slowed. The house on Elmwood Drive, as Renee had understood it, was a large asset in a family to which she now belonged, held by a woman in her 70s who had no immediate heirs beyond a son who already stood to inherit it. The plan, and it had been a plan, I want you to understand that, I am not diminishing it by calling it something gentler, had been to consolidate that asset earlier rather than later, through legal mechanisms that would appear on the surface to be protective rather than acquisitive. The LPA, granted freely by an aging mother to her devoted son and his wife, would give them the authority to act on her behalf. property in the hands of people who had authority to manage it, could, in time, be managed in ways that served the managers. Dolores had not been an innocent bystander in this. Dolores had suggested it. This, Renee told me, her voice still quiet and her eyes still on the table, with the particular honesty of a woman who has reached the limit of what pretending can accomplish. Dolores had seen what there was to see, and had done the arithmetic, and had told her daughter that the arithmetic favored action, and that action required establishing presence and normalizing access before establishing paperwork, and that a woman recovering from a fall was a woman whose capacity to resist was diminished. Marcus was listening to all of this with the face of a man hearing something he had known, in some unexamined part of himself, and had chosen not to examine. When Renee finished, the room was quiet. Outside, the February night was settled and cold. The freesias in the blue jug had opened fully over the course of the day, filling the kitchen with their smell. I took a breath. "Marcus," I said. "Look at me." He looked at me. "Hey, I love you," I said. "I have loved you since before you had language, and I will love you until I don't have it anymore. But what you allowed to happen in this house, in my house, whether you understood it fully or not, it caused harm. To me, to the truth of what we are to each other. Do you understand that?" He nodded. His eyes were bright, and he was not quite crying, which I think cost him something. "I need you to understand it," I said. "Not perform understanding. Understand it." "I do," he said. "Mum, I'm sorry. He stopped. He put his hand flat on the table, the way his father used to do when he was choosing his words. "I didn't think about what it meant, for you. I let myself think about the money, and I didn't think about what it meant." "I know," I said. "That's what I need you to fix." He nodded. "Good," I said. "Then here is what happens next." I had thought about what happened next for 11 days in a hospital room, and for 3 weeks in a back bedroom, and for all the accumulated years of a life that had taught me the difference between punishment and correction, between what feels satisfying in the short term and what actually changes things. I told Dolores that I expected her to be out of my room by Sunday morning, and that I would arrange, through Gerald, for a formal written acknowledgement that no rights of occupancy had been established. I told her this without cruelty and without excess warmth, in the tone of information, because information is what it was. I told Renee that I was prepared to help her and Marcus with the debt if they brought me the actual numbers, the real figures, sound not a performance of the figures, and that I would review them with the same attention I had brought to accounts for 50 years, and I would tell her honestly what could be helped and what could not, and what the path forward looked like. I told her that this was my choice, made freely, and that it was conditional on one thing: honesty from this point forward, complete and unperformed. No more folders. No more plans constructed around assumptions about my diminishment. "If you come to me as my son's wife and tell me the truth of what you need," I said, "I'm capable of being more help to you than you have imagined. What I am not capable of, what I will not be, is a resource to be managed without my knowledge." Renee looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I had not expected, which is that she was sorry. And not the performed sorry, not the strategic sorry, but the smaller, quieter sorry of a woman who has seen herself clearly for a moment and does not like entirely what she sees. "I know," I said. "I believe you." I looked at my son. "The LPA," I said. "Is there something in you that genuinely believes I need it?" He shook his head immediately. "Then we won't speak of it again," I said. "And if there is ever a time, many years from now, I intend, when something of that kind becomes genuinely necessary, you will speak to Gerald and you will speak to me, and it will be arranged transparently and with full understanding on all sides. Are we agreed?" "Agreed," Marcus said. "Good," I said. I picked up my folder, and I set it on the sideboard behind me, beside Emmanuel's photograph, which has stood on that sideboard since 2015. Saw his reading glasses on his face, his cup of tea going cold, the particular quality of his attention. I looked at him for a moment, the way you look at someone you have been wanting to tell something to. There, I thought. That's how it's done. Dolores left the following morning. She was efficient about it, I will give her that. Her things were packed and in the hallway by 8, and she did not make a scene, which I think surprised her daughter and surprised Marcus, and did not surprise me at all, because Dolores was, underneath the performance of her, a woman who understood power and understood when she had lost the field. She said goodbye to me at the front door. She looked at me with something that was not quite respect, and not quite its opposite. Something in the space between recognition and recalibration. "You're a formidable woman, Vivian," she said. "I'm a prepared woman," I said. "There's a difference." She went down the path. Her daughter drove her to the station. I closed the front door. I stood in my hallway. Emmanuel's hook was empty. I had, while Dolores was packing, quietly removed the olive green coat and placed it in the hallway chair, where her other things were gathered. The hook was bare, and it would stay bare, and that was entirely correct. I went upstairs. I opened the door to my room. It smelled of her perfume. It would for a few days. I opened the window and let the February air come in, cold and clean, and I stood in the middle of my room, my wardrobe, my mirror, my king-size bed that I had chosen in 2008, and I breathed it in. I stripped the bed. I opened the wardrobe, and I looked at what remained of her arrangement inside it, and I moved every last item back to where it belonged, with the methodical satisfaction of a woman restoring a balance sheet to its correct form. Then I went back downstairs, and I called Amara. "It's done," I said. "Grandma?" A pause, and in the pause, something that might have been tears, or might have been the particular emotion that comes from witnessing something long in the making finally arrive. "How do you feel?" I looked out at the garden. The magnolia tree, bare in February, its branches holding the pale morning light exactly as they had held it for 30 years, patient and absolutely certain of April. "I feel like myself," I said. "So I want to tell you where things stand now, because resolutions in real life are not clean, and I would rather give you the truth of what is complex than the comfort of what is false. Marcus and I have been talking. Really talking, in the way that requires you to say difficult things in the language they actually deserve, rather than the language that manages the difficulty down to something bearable. It is not easy. It is sometimes uncomfortable in ways that make me want to retreat into the old practiced pleasantness that has served me for so many years. But I have lived long enough to know the difference between the short-term comfort of not saying things and the long-term cost of the silence, and I have decided I am done paying that particular cost. He is a good man. He made bad choices in a season of financial fear, and he allowed someone he loved to construct around him a plan that he did not fully examine, and these things are true simultaneously, and neither of them cancels the other. We are doing what families do when they have arrived at a moment of honest accounting. We are going through it, carefully, without the comfort of pretending it didn't happen. Renee brought me the real numbers 2 weeks after the dinner. She sat at my kitchen table, spice rack on the left, tea caddy on the counter, and she put down a folder of her own, and I looked at the figures, and I did what I have been doing with figures my entire life, which is read them clearly and think about them structurally, and tell the person across from me the truth of what they mean. Some of what I saw could be helped, so some of what I saw required a different kind of reckoning. I told her both. She listened. She did not perform gratitude or relief. She simply listened, with the particular attention of a woman who is finally allowing herself to receive information rather than managing its delivery. And that, I thought, was a beginning. Dolores has not returned to the house. She is not prohibited. She may come as a guest, on occasions when she is invited, with the understanding that the terms of her presence are mine to set. Whether she will accept those terms or decline them is her business. I am not in the habit of requiring people to change entirely in order to earn my basic regard. But I am equally not in the habit of offering my house as a stage for other people's ambitions, and I expect that particular understanding to hold. Gerald Whitfield's letter was sent. The preliminary inquiry was closed, and the title to 14 Elmwood Drive remains precisely where it has always been. Amara comes every Sunday now. She brings something: fruit from the market, flowers for the blue jug, a book she thinks I would like. And we sit in the kitchen, and I make tea, and sometimes we cook together, and sometimes we just talk, in the way I have always believed talking between people who trust each other should work, without performance, without management, without the careful calibration of what the other person is able to hear. She asked me once, 2 weeks after the dinner, what I had been thinking during those 11 days in the hospital, when I was watching the strip of sky and not showing anyone what I was actually doing. I was thinking about my mother, I said, and about what she understood that she tried to give me. What was that? Amara asked. I thought about the leather ledger, about the tin box under the bed, about the pressure of her palms on the open page, the certainty of her voice. Numbers do not lie, but the people holding the pen sometimes do. That the most important thing a woman can know, I said, is the full value of what she holds, not what other people tell her it's worth, not what the room decides it's worth, what it is actually, structurally, verifiably worth. I paused. The house, the accounts, the knowledge, the relationships she has tended carefully, all of it. She needs to know the full number, because when someone comes to tell her it's less than she thought, she needs to be able to show them the ledger. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to learn that. You're already learning it, I said. You've been learning it since you were 8 years old, and you noticed things that adults in the room were choosing not to see. You just need the language for it. She smiled at me. She has her mother's eyes and my jawline, and Emmanuel's particular quality of attending to things, which is to say, she holds the world with a kind of steady, unperformed curiosity that I have always found to be the rarest form of intelligence. Teach me, she said. Sit down, I said, and I did. I'm back in my room. My clothes are back in my wardrobe, in the order I have always kept them, by season, by occasion, by color within each category. Because I am a woman who believes that order is a form of respect for your own time. My mirror reflects the room as I have always known it. The window looks out over the garden, where the wisteria is beginning, very cautiously, to consider what it will do this spring, and where the magnolia tree, as reliable as it has been for 30 years, is preparing its glorious, and what Emmanuel always called, excessive bloom. I make tea every morning in my kitchen, with my spice rack on the left and my skillet on its hook, and I read the paper, and I look out at the garden, and I think about my mother, who kept her ledger in a tin box and pressed it flat with both palms, and told me that the pen was the most powerful thing in any room, and that a woman who knew where it was kept would never be entirely at anyone's mercy. I think about Emmanuel, who trusted my judgment on matters of structure, and who was right to, and who would have found this satisfying in the particular way of a man who always knew that the person beside him was more formidable than the world gave her credit for. I think about Amara, who is learning what I am teaching her, which is not a curriculum and is not a system, but is simply this: know what you hold, know its full value, keep the ledger current. And when someone comes to you with a story about what your life is worth, a smaller story than the truth, a story dressed in the language of care and practicality and concern, open the ledger. Let them see the balance. Let them understand that the woman they assumed was not paying attention has been paying attention since before they arrived, and will be paying attention long after they have gone. I am 71 years old. I have lived in this house for 32 years. I have built what I have built through patience and precision and the deep structural intelligence of a woman who was taught, before she had language for it, that the ledger is power and the power is hers. My bedroom is my bedroom. My house is my house. And the strip of pewter sky through the window at Mercy General, the one I watched for 11 days, that sky is still there, steady and unchanged, doing what sky does, which is hold everything beneath it without requiring acknowledgement. I'm still here, and I know the full value of what I hold. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same, and if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here.